Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual forum. My name is Jana Farley, and I use she, her pronouns. I am the Communications Director for the ACLU of South Dakota. Now, year after year, issues that matter most to South Dakotans have been ignored as some lawmakers continue to introduce anti-trans legislation intended to codify discrimination in our state. And year after year, LGBTQ plus and Two-Spirit organizations, partner organizations, and allies across the state have joined forces to defeat these bills. Now, this year has been no different. That's why we wanted to get this group of people together to talk about anti-trans legislation we've seen introduced over the years and how you can get plugged in for the fight ahead. So before we begin, however, I would like everybody on the panel to briefly introduce themselves. Tony, let's start with you.
Hello, my name is Tony Diamond. I'm the Vice President for the Black Hills Center for Equality. I'm a transgender woman. My pronouns are she and her. I'm just wanting to be very active in helping ensure that we have equality and equal rights for all people.
Thank you, Tony. Candy.
Etiwashte, Hematak Yapi, Lampe Tukile, Iyo Hachante, Washte Nape Chiziapi, Imachiapi, Wakiantuampi Iyo Yampali, Imachiapi, Chante Makiloi. Mi Washichi Chizenkile, Candy brings plenty. I would like to greet each and every one of you with a handshake from my heart. My name is Candy Brings Plenty, and I am the Indigenous Justice Organizer and Lobbyist for the ACLU South Dakota, and I'm an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux Tribe.
All right, Susan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Williams, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the Executive Director and founder of the Transformation Project and also the Transformation Project Advocacy Network, which is based in South Dakota. We're in Sioux Falls. Very happy to be here today.
Great. Jet.
Sorry about that. Hi, my name is Jet Janellis. I am the Advocacy Manager and a lobbyist for the ACLU of South Dakota. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and she, her, hers, and I am a non-binary person who's super excited to have this discussion.
And last but not least, Catherine.
Hi, everybody. My name is Catherine Oakley. I am the State Legislative Director and Senior Counsel at the Human Rights Campaign. I work on lots of issues all across the country, but specifically anti-trans issues, and I'm really delighted to be here with everyone today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for being our panelists today. Now, before we really dive into the forum and the discussion, I'd like to offer some space and time for a brief land acknowledgement. Jet.
Hi, yeah, even though we're in a virtual space, we want to honor the land that we are all on respectively. So the ACLU of South Dakota offices are located on the ancestral territory of the Etchetti-Shikoe Seven Council Fires, an alliance that consisted of the Santee, Yankton, and Teton Lakota. They're commonly known as the Sioux by non-native people. The 7 tribes now occupying 9 different reservations in South Dakota. The 9 reservations are Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, Crow Creek Sioux Tribe, Flandreau Santee Sioux Tribe, Lower Brule Sioux Tribe, Oglala Sioux Tribe, Rosebud Sioux Tribe, Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate, Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and the Yankton Sioux Tribe. The ACLU of South Dakota honors and respects the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this territory on which we gather.
All right, thank you, Jet. Well, let's start today by talking about the history of anti-trans bills we've seen introduced in South Dakota. You know, like I said, year after year, South Dakota lawmakers have introduced these bills and really zeroed in on transgender people and attempted to pass bills that would codify discrimination against them. You know, we've seen the bathroom bill in 2016, the bill to prohibit gender identity discussion in schools in 2018, the transgender sports bill in 2019, the bill to prohibit doctors from providing medically necessary care to transgender youth in 2020. This year, we've seen the bill to make it impossible for transgender people to have birth certificates that accurately reflect their gender identity, which was killed. And of course, we've seen another transgender sports bill introduced. Lots of history there. Why do you think some legislators keep introducing discriminatory legislation like this? And what has it been like seeing bills like this every single year?
Go ahead.
Well, as a transgender person, I can speak for myself that it feels like a personal attack against me and who I am, and it's almost like they're trying to deny my existence. So these bills are hurtful. They make people that are trans want to hide and not be outwardly open about who we are because we're afraid we're going to be attacked. So these bills, I just don't understand them, and they don't make any sense. And I just think it's like our legislators in this state are just fearful, ignorant, or just outright hateful towards trans or the LGBTQ community.
Catherine,
Yeah.
I think you were going to say something? Or Jet, sorry, which one of you?
Yeah, go ahead, please. Thanks.
I was just going to say, I think that, something that I said in our Q&A that I've been really Susan, that I've been really thinking about was that it really does seem like it's a backlash for progress that we've seen over the past few years in terms of transgender visibility and acceptance. I think, in particular with House Bill 1217, the anti-trans sports bill that we've got right now. We've seen so many of these sports bills basically since the South Dakota High School Activities Association decided to have to make sure that they had a trans inclusive policy. So it's once that was established, now there's all these attacks on that. So it really just seems like it's a backlash against the progress that we've seen.
Yeah, so I have a slightly different perspective, I think, being the only person on this call who's not from North Dakota. From South Dakota. One of the things about South Dakota that I think is really, South Dakota has a pretty unique role, I think, in the conversation about anti-trans legislation, period. As we have already alluded to, North Carolina gets a lot of the notoriety because they passed House Bill 2 into law, which was their anti-transgender bathroom bill that they passed in 2016. And what most people, I think, probably outside South Dakota don't remember is that South Dakota pioneered the bathroom bill. South Dakota was the first state to have passed a bathroom bill through one chamber, then it was two chambers, then it went to the governor. So they were the first on all of those. And the governor vetoed it, and then North Carolina went on to replicate the mistake, but in fact pass it. And then I think we all saw what the repercussions of that bill was for North Carolina. And so I think South Dakota has this sort of unique positioning within the overall national movement, where our opposition is really continuing to push these bills. And I believe the reason that we're seeing these bills is that our opposition was unsuccessful in stopping marriage equality. Then they tried to figure out, okay, if they can't stop marriage equality, then what can they do next? And they tried to say, what about wedding refusals? What if people shouldn't have to serve people who get gay married? And then when that didn't work, they just kept trying. They had the RFRA push in Indiana in 2015. Then they ran out of things. It wasn't working. And so they pivoted and they started targeting trans people. And that's where these anti-trans bills came from in 2016, when HB 2 and then subsequently in Texas, when that bathroom bill also failed, our opposition then had to find something different. And they've continued to try to find the thing that will be the thing that helps them claw back equality. And I think, unfortunately, South Dakota has just really been a testing ground for some of this legislation that's actually being pushed by national groups who oppose equality. And as I say, unfortunately, I think South Dakota has been the place where a lot of this has gotten tested out.
And some of these bills are very similar from state to state too. Isn't that correct, Catherine?
Yeah, extremely so. And, sometimes that's because they're all coming from the same source. And so they're identical because they're coming from the same place. Other times, some of these legislators get inspired by things that are happening in other states, and then they do copycats. But yeah, it is true really across the board. A lot of the anti-LGBTQ legislation that we see is very, very similar from state to state.
Now in South Dakota, we just beat House Bill 1076, which, as I said before, would have stopped transgender people from amending their birth certificates. But now we're up against a couple more discriminatory bills, HB 1217 and HB 1247. Tell me a little bit about these bills and why they are so discriminatory and why we're so concerned about them. Who do I want to pick on to tell me a little bit about these bills? Maybe Jet, can you give me just an overview of these couple bills that are up?
Yeah, so HB 1217 would ban transgender women and girl athletes from participating on sports teams that are consistent with their gender. And it would designate that teams can be male, female, or co-ed, and that male and female are designated by biological sex. Defining biological sex as at birth. And House Bill 1247 is a bill that is would allow medical professionals at basically all levels of the medical system to refuse service to anyone that they had a religious, philosophical, moral, ethical objection to that treatment or that person. So that would mean that counselors could refuse to, serve help youth in crisis. That would mean that people filing insurance claims could refuse to do that. That would mean that any level of the medical system, they could refuse to serve people that they disagree with their circumstances or their identity. So that could be on the basis of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, their marital status, their an interracial relationship, really anything, because personal beliefs can be so broad and subjective, and so so 1247 is not only an anti-trans bill, it is a bill that has a lot of broader implications.
So now when you hear of these bills being introduced, what are some of the first thoughts that run through your mind? Tony, Candy, Susan?
I definitely feel like South Dakota has been the lead on a lot of these very anti-trans and homophobic bills. I came from living in Portland, Oregon for over 8 years before I started working with ACLU South Dakota last year. And I worked within the legislative session in Oregon for 5 years. And it was quite an experience to go from one spectrum of what legislative progress looks like to moving back to South Dakota and being on the other end of the spectrum. And, with the experience that I was introduced to initially with what the power of the legislative process could prosper for the trans community and LGBTQ two-spirit folks, moving here showed me that, this is almost like, worst case scenario, because a lot of the bills continue to be, discriminating. And just like we were talking about 1247, it definitely does have implications for discrimination across the spectrum, but yet that is part of that intention to disguise it as not just discriminating against trans folks. So, even as a two-spirit, I think I didn't introduce myself as well, as I identify as a queer, indigenous, non-binary two-spirit. So having to not only work through and advocate within the tribal sector and reclaim the spaces and the really empowering impact for our youth to identify themselves, and just even internally grasp their intersectionalities, but to have government continuously attacking your identity is very detrimental within the scope of empowering our future generations. So not only is it just an attack on legislation, but it is on our youth and our future generations.
And to add to that, I would say that as a trans person, I recently have had suffered a traumatic brain injury. So it would be very scary for me to be, walk into a hospital or a doctor's office and know that they could deny me treatment. And so that bill I hope it gets beaten, because yeah, I don't want to, if it limits me from who I can see as far as medical professionals, if let's say the specialist that works with neurology and brains is anti-LGBTQ, he can refuse to see me, and then what am I left to do? So I either deny who I am and try to hide who I am just so I can seek medical treatment, or I get, so this bill is going to be very hurtful. And for the youth that I know several transgender youth here in Rapid City who this bill would, the one about women participating in sports, transgender women participating in sports, that would hurt them, because then they would be not denied the opportunity to participate in a sport, possibly get a scholarship to go to to a college or something like that, just because of who they identify as. Though both of these bills would be very hurtful to our community and our state.
Now, we've already talked a little bit about the coordinated effort, or the seemingly coordinated effort among different legislators in different states to bring similar bills like this across the country. And, Catherine, you touched a little bit on, some of the successes, so to speak, that they've had, like with North Carolina. Last year, Idaho passed a wholesale ban on transgender women and girls participating in women's and girls sports. The law has since been blocked in court. Has there been any other instances like that? And what kind of legal implications does this mean for South Dakota?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right that Idaho's HB 500 was almost immediately enjoined by a federal court. And the court looked, this is a preliminary injunction. This is very early on in the process. I don't mean to overstate that, but I also think that the judge did a pretty thorough examination of the evidence that had been put forward, at least at that point. And one of the things that the judge concluded was that there was no non-discriminatory basis upon which the legislature could have acted to pass that sports bill. One of the things that the judge looked at was that there were actually two pieces of anti-transgender legislation that were passed by the Idaho legislature last year. One was an effort to try to prohibit trans people from being able to update their birth certificates, and the other was an anti-transgender sports bill. And the court looked at those things and said, look, clearly this legislature has an issue with trans people. I mean, they are just attacking trans people. That is very clear. And because they can't give a single example of an issue that's arisen in Idaho because of trans girls participating in sports, it's hard to imagine what kind of legitimate policy question they could be addressing. And so the judge took those two things together and said, this really looks like discrimination to me. Now, again, I want to make it very clear, this is just a preliminary stage and the case has a lot more work to come. But I do think that that's telling, because that's the case in all of the states where we're seeing these anti-transgender sports bills. We're seeing them in Mississippi. There's one that's moving in Mississippi right now. And there's one in Tennessee, and they're moving all across the country. And when you ask these legislators, hey, is this an issue? Are you seeing this as a problem? The answer is no, not in my state. And yet that's not keeping them from hurrying to pass these laws that are going to hurt people. And I think to the point of the Idaho bill, I think it's also important to mention that that bill is really pretty egregious in sort of this idea of like how you're going to verify whether a person is quote unquote biologically female. And some of the other bills emulate that. Fewer of them do this year than last year. And I think that's partially because people are understanding that this is really devolving. This is not a question of fairness, as our opponents would like for people to think about it, because if it was, you wouldn't have to go down this rabbit hole of how many chromosomes and what about this and what about that, right? It would be easy to identify where there are people who are gaming the system. But because there aren't people gaming the system, they have to invent this very complicated pseudo-scientific way of trying to figure out who the trans people are. And I mean, I think that's just evidence that there is no problem and that they're working really hard to pretend as if there is one.
Now, even when these bills are defeated, legislation like this can still be very harmful. What are some of the real world implications bills like this have on transgender South Dakotans, particularly the youth? Susan, what do you think?
Well, the situation that presents itself every January is very grim to transgender youth and transgender people from around the state. It's not a time that people look forward to because they have constantly seen attacks on their very being. This has happened for the last 7 years, and it gets very old, and it gets very, very challenging for them to be able to handle. You know, we're in the frozen tundra. It's cold. It's oftentimes not super sunny. It's a time when people are already struggling because we're not heading outside and doing outdoor activities like we were the rest of the year. And now with the pandemic, it has been very challenging. So we're seeing people that feel unwelcome in their own state. They feel like they are being erased. They feel as though, you know, why do these legislators hate us so much? So it is really tough on these individuals and these families to live here. And, you know, maybe that is something some of these legislators would like to change. Maybe they would like to get rid of LGBTQ people, because that's kind of what it is. Not get rid of them, but get rid of their participation in different things around the state. You know, we saw it early on with bathrooms. Now we're seeing it with sports. With the 1076, excuse me, HB 1076, you know, it was trying to make it so that people couldn't change their birth certificate. Well, you know, here, when you're 16 and want to go get a job, you give your employer, your future employer, your birth certificate. So definitely is very upsetting to trans people and trans kids from around the state. It's a very hard time for them.
What kind of bills would you like to see legislators focus on when it comes to LGBTQ plus and Two-Spirit South Dakotans?
First of all, you know, as a Two-Spirit, I have been witnessing firsthand, you know, maybe it's just because I work for the ACLU of South Dakota and I'm very involved with the legislative session, but, you know, our Indigenous bills have been getting killed immediately. And so I can only speak from the perspective as a Two-Spirit, a non-binary Two-Spirit, but, you know, South Dakota is my ancestral lands. And, you know, that in itself is another very detrimental trauma that is being, you know, inflicted by our own state. And as, you know, just being from ancestral lands and having Two-Spirit relatives that are trans, it is such a you know, I can't even convey the words because it's such a heartache and a heartbreak. especially in the past legislative sessions when, I did invite and I did organize tribal nations to come stand and support their trans two-spirit Oyate. And last year we did get to witness that. And, I feel that our legislator needs to honor and bring to the surface the intention of the words that our leaderships continue to say about what South Dakota is. And then within the legislative bills are trying to say what we aren't. But holistically, South Dakota definitely has a spectrum of uniting, and in our Lakota language, we say makakiase, and that means we are all related and we are all connected. And so whenever we leave out our trans relatives or our LGBTQ and two-spirit relatives, that does not create a functioning community. So I would love to see more proactive and positive legislative bills. And part of that too is the work that I've been doing as an Indigenous justice organizer to bring that education and to elevate the voices to speak. Because, even hearing about these Idaho bills, my youth, my teens are, very well versed in it because they've been using Snapchat to share what these bills are. And it's been really super exciting for me. So I know that our youth are ready to speak up, and we just need to, elevate their voices. But at the same time, because of my experience, bringing my child last year to stand up and oppose and be a part of the rally against 1057, I was looking around the room and I was witnessing and hearing these senators, verbally abusing and impacting our trans kids. And so I just know there is this continuing leading force to imply these anti-trans legislative bills in South Dakota. And, I see how we are targeted, and I know that it's going to continuously take folks like everyone on this panel and, just continuing to elevate this narrative that this is not the South Dakota we want.
Recently, President Biden signed an executive order on preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. What do you think that means for South Dakota for bills like these? Particularly like House Bill 1217, the new transgender sports bill.
Well, I'm happy to start with this one, and others please do chime in. So I think one of the things that's important to say about the executive order is that it is an order that the president issued telling agencies to explore what it is that they need to do in order to be fully in compliance with federal law after the Bostock decision from this summer. And the Bostock decision was a decision that was based on federal civil rights law related to employment that said that prohibitions of discrimination on the basis of sex include sort of inherently sexual orientation and gender identity, because discrimination on the basis of sex is inherently tied to discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And I add that not just because I'm a lawyer and I can't help myself, although maybe it's just like a little bit of that, but also to emphasize that the president is directing agencies to do what it is the Supreme Court has told them to do. This is about respect for the rule of law. The law has been clarified, and so now the federal government needs to be in compliance with that Supreme Court decision. I say all of that because I think that there's a little bit of frustration with some state legislators who feel like the president is telling them what to do. And while, of course, the president in some circumstances can tell them that they can do this or that, this is about the Supreme Court and what the Supreme Court has said that the law is. And what the law is that in federal civil rights law, discrimination on the basis of sex includes sexual orientation and gender identity. And among other things, that will trickle into Title IX. And, you know, I think folks generally think of Title IX as being about sports. It's about educational opportunities more broadly, but sports is where I think most people come to, right? And they think of it as being this really important civil rights advantage, civil rights advancement, particularly for women. And so I do think that there are some people who feel like maybe including trans women and girls in Title IX somehow takes something away from cisgender women who are protected from Title IX. And I mean, that's just inherently not the case. Title IX protects from discrimination on the basis of sex, and that means cisgender women, it means trans women and girls, it means all of us. And so I think that it's a really false narrative to sort of say that because trans women and girls now have protection under Title IX, that in some way hurts cisgender women and girls. It absolutely doesn't. It does mean that a bill like this that's passed in the state, you know, if this bill were to pass in the state, it would put South Dakota at odds with federal civil rights law, and that schools that are receiving public funds by virtue of receiving federal government funds would then have the threat of having enforcement action taken against them if they are not in compliance with federal law, including Title IX. So there are ramifications for South Dakota to be moving forward with something like this. Now, to be clear, this has actually been true of Title IX for quite some time. The previous administration, I don't think, was going to spend a lot of time making sure that schools weren't discriminating against trans youth in sports or otherwise. But, you know, this administration is more interested in A, upholding the rule of law, and B, is more committed to equality. So we'll see what the ramifications of this are. I think there's a lot that's still to be solidified. But I mean, certainly if South Dakota goes this direction, I think we can safely say they're putting federal funds at risk.
Now, over the years, you know, obviously we've talked about the long list of bills that South Dakota lawmakers have introduced targeting transgender people. Terrible long list, but you know what? On the flip side, we've had some great success defeating these bills. What do you all think are some of the most effective advocacy tactics when it comes to fighting anti-trans bills? Jet, Tony, I know you've had you've done a lot of work with advocating against these bills. What do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the most effective things that people can do when they're contacting their legislators is to tell their personal stories and really like speak their truth when they are connecting with their legislators, because you are an expert in your own experience, and you know, if you are directly affected by a piece of legislation, there are things that you know about what that legislation is going to do that legislators do not, because they are not an expert in the transgender experience. They are not an expert in what it is to be the parent of a transgender kid. You know, they don't know the implications, they don't understand. And sometimes it can feel like they don't want to know either. So, you know, I do want to say, like, share your experience, speak your truth to, you know, what you are able to, you know, because sometimes it can be traumatic to like bring that up to people who just don't care. But you know, a lot of legislators do care, and I think you know, a lot of us can speak to how we have seen legislators be swayed by those personal stories, have been swayed by people bringing new information and by testimony and by the sheer number of emails they get. You know, so that's what I would say.
I would also add that it's the team. I call it a team because you have all these different organizations and people in the LGBTQ community working together. It's us working together where we have legal experts, we have people, you know, who are continuously fighting for equality. And then you have, like you said, the personal stories. I believe House Bill 1076 was shut down based on personal testimony, because one of the senators personally asked me and the other transgender person that was testifying, it's like, how does this bill specifically affect you? And we were able to speak from our own personal experiences as to why and how that was going to affect us in a negative way. So I think it's a team effort. We have to continually work as a team, bringing in the ACLU Transformation Project and Black Hills Center for Equality, and working together. It helps, I think, our legislators see that it's not just one person speaking. We're speaking for everyone, not just one person.
And Tony, you alluded a little bit to my next question, is the idea of, do legislators actually listen to their constituents? And it sounds like, yes, in the case particularly of 1076, your story really made a difference to these legislators. What about some of the other bills? Like, I know, Susan, you've done a lot of work with advocating in peer and helping connect legislators with transgender people. What do you think? Are they listening? Do they want to listen?
Well, I will tell you, Jana, that there is a statistic that says 80% of Americans have never met a transgender person. And I feel like that is pretty true in South Dakota, if not even more. So one thing that we are trying to do is to introduce legislators to someone in their district who is transgender or has a transgender child, and to be able to help those transgender people lift up their voices, to advocate for themselves, and to have empowerment from the rest of us as allies. So we do feel like there are some legislators that are willing to listen. I do think that there are quite a few legislators who are ignorant on the topic of gender identity and gender expression, maybe not because they choose to be, but because they just are uneducated, and they've heard so much about the trans legislation in the past that I think that sometimes that skews their view. And so really we want to focus on getting the real stories out there and helping people to get to know the real people that these kind of bills impact, because it's impacting thousands of South Dakotans.
Something that also comes up every year when these bills are introduced is the idea of, like, how are these legislators in office? Are these really the type of people who we want representing us? So that brings up another question on kind of the flip side of advocating for a particular bill. What about, at the ballot box on election day? What can we do, or is there anything we can do to make sure that the legislators who are in office are really representing everybody, our transgender friends and neighbors too? What can we do?
I would say we need to be, as a community, we need to work towards helping get people that are LGBTQ friendly or advocates, or even people in that community, to participate in government. That is the main reason why I ran for the State House of Representatives last year, was to help bring awareness to who we are, that we do exist, and that, we're no different than anybody else. Just because I'm transgender doesn't, the conversations that I had with people have helped them to see that, I'm not contagious in a sense, but just getting people involved in different levels of government. I think that's how we're going to be able to help those that are already in government learn, because if they don't have the knowledge, they're going to be going off of their own personal experiences and what they already know, instead of broadening their horizons. So I think we need to get more people involved in the city council, local government, state government, federal, and it's encouraging to see how our federal government has even put people of the LGBTQ community in offices that are going to affect the nation. So I think getting more involved in supporting and supporting those people that do want to run, so that they have an opportunity to win.
Now we talked about too that, these bills have obviously come up year after year, and we've got, LGBTQ plus and Two-Spirit organizations, partner organizations, and allies that have, joined forces every year to defeat these bills. It really feels like the LGBTQ plus and Two-Spirit community is stronger in South Dakota because of this, and just wanted to get all of your thoughts on that.
One of the things I wanted to say that was a part of your previous question as well, and definitely a part of this question, but I moved to Rapid City in May this past year after living on the reservation. And I was so surprised by seeing and watching the different floor discussions and debates about how the representation in Rapid City is a very opposite ends of perspectives when it comes to trans and LGBTQ and Two-Spirit advocacy. And even just hearing those debates and the words coming out of these representatives of Rapid City, I don't think folks in their districts really are aware of their standpoints of these representatives when it comes to trans and LGBTQ and Two-Spirit folks. And I do feel like they do have great platforms on other bills and other perspectives, but I am witnessing and learning for myself how as LGBTQ and Two-Spirit advocates and organizations, that we need to host our own candidate forums, that we need to be asking these questions and putting them in the spotlight so they can answer those real direct, real nitty gritty information that will alter the vote of some of their district members and constituents.
Does anyone want to touch on the strength of the LGBTQ plus and Two-Spirit community in South Dakota?
Sure, I will speak to that. Just even in the last few years, things have just exploded with allies and coalition partners working together to make this state better. So I have seen I've seen a tremendous growth in strength and in numbers as well. But I just feel so privileged to have so many people working alongside me that are so wise and so experienced. So I think it's been wonderful to see.
I know our time is about up, but before we sign off, I would like to invite each of our panelists just an opportunity to add anything before we close off for the day. Who wants to go first, or do I just call on someone?
I can go first.
I'll go first.
Oh, go ahead.
I would say that my what I would like to share with people would be, don't get caught up in titles. Get to know the person. For me, that I think that's the greatest learning experience for me, is getting to know a person for who they are, not based on the title that they carry. And once you get to know a person, it changes a lot. So even if you hear a title afterwards, it's like, oh, but that doesn't really fit that person. So I'm personally, let's work together on bridging the gap and helping people, educating people to help them understand who we are, what we are, and where we come from, and that we're no different than they are. But I think, get away from titles, learn to get to know the person, and base your decision or your opinion on a person on getting to know them.
Candy?
I just wanted to send some encouraging words, out to those who will be watching this. And I know, just having Two-Spirit and trans representation out into social media from South Dakota, from people's home state, is huge. And I want to encourage other organizations to do the same. And, even as of today, I was getting some messages about some Two-Spirit trans folks who aren't residing in South Dakota. But that's one of the cultural norms in Lakota, Dakota, Nakota cultures, is that, even though we don't live in the state, our homeland, our tribal nations are here in South Dakota. And so it does impact folks who are not residing in South Dakota, but the way we lead and the way we continue to advocate and the way we continue to navigate as a united voice builds that empowerment and allows those who are most impacted to feel represented in a positive way. So I just want to thank everyone here on the panel and ACLU South Dakota for creating this space, and just encourage, our youth and even our elders who are still coming out, to know that you are supported, and we're going to continue this fight, and we're going to continue uniting and protecting our sacred, Two-Spirit and trans and LGBTQ youth. And I just want to thank you for being authentic and empowered enough to stand up and be yourself. So Wopi Lataka.
Catherine?
Yeah, well, and I think I want to build off a little bit about what both Tony and Candy have said, but I think it is really hard. I know it's really hard to have South Dakota be this testing ground for these horrible bills that are not things that people in South Dakota are asking for. It's not, these legislators aren't putting these forward because there's a real problem. I know that it is really painful to see this happen every year. And it's painful in every state, but as I said, South Dakota has sort of this unique role as being on the front lines of anti-transgender legislation. And I just want to say that to the folks who are watching, there are a lot of people who care deeply about you and care deeply about your well-being. And some of those people are right here on this call. And there are more people who aren't on this call who are also working. This is about working toward a better world, and that you are not alone. And no matter how hard it feels, no matter how ugly it all feels, and it is ugly, and I very much affirm that, but also please know that there are lots of folks who are working to make this better.
Jet?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think to the previous question about, the LGBTQ and Two-Spirit community in South Dakota being stronger for this. I'm new to the state, so I can't speak to, that growth in real time, but the power of the organizing that I have seen this year is incredible and inspiring. And I've talked to legislators who said they had hundreds of emails in opposition to 1076. And I have spoken to so many people who wanted to testify and wanted to, and have been organizing in the past years and getting so involved and continuing to raise their voice. And it's, it's beautiful. And it's, I think that y'all are changing the landscape of organizing here and making such a positive change every time that you come back each year to keep fighting, to get stronger, to come together, to say no, nobody's asking for this, as Catherine said, and we're not going to accept this, and we're never going to accept this, and we're going to keep coming back. And I think the more we do that, the more we come together, the stronger we get, the bigger chance we have to just keep killing this stuff and keep, being victorious, essentially, and right now we have Senate Bill 190, which is a non-discrimination protections introduced by Senator Foster. That that's something we can fight for. That's something we can keep fighting for. If it doesn't make it this year, we can change the landscape. We can make a difference. And as everyone's kind of said beforehand, you're not alone, and we're so strong together.
All right, Susan, any final thoughts?
Sure. So we all know that South Dakota is known as an anti-trans factory. We've made national, even world news for our anti-trans bills. And that's not the South Dakota that I know. Those are not the people that I know. The people that live here are brave and courageous, And I want to thank you for continuing to fight for who you are, to be who you are, because who you are matters to all of us. We're here for you, and there are so many others that are there for you as well. We're here to fight, and we're here to stand up for you, to speak on behalf of the beauty that is trans and two-spirit people. And I'm just so thankful to be able to do this kind of work because it's so meaningful. And we know that we're really, we're up against something that is bigger, and it's a force that is nationwide. It's not just a South Dakota thing, but I do believe that we are on the right side of history and that we're all working to make this world a better place. So keep the fight. And I know Jana will probably tell you all how to get involved with fighting against this kind of legislation to make South Dakota a place where all feel welcome and loved and safe.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, thank you. Thank you to everyone, all of you, Candy, Catherine, Susan, Jet, Tony. This has been a great panel discussion. So thank you again for your time. I will include the contact information for each of the organizations, ACLU of South Dakota, the Human Rights Campaign, Black Hills Center for Equality, and the Transformation Project in the comments. So you won't have to remember any long web URLs that I would spout off. So just look in the comments, you'll get the contact information. And that really is the best way. If you're looking for a way to get involved, click on the links in the comments and reach out to these organizations. And like Jet said, we can change the landscape. We can make a difference. So let's do it. We can do it together. This is just the start. So thank you everyone for joining us today. This has been a fantastic discussion.